All right, here we have our Series 5 tier list. In S tier, we have just cards that are very strong, very powerful in the meta, and very flexible. In the A tier, we also have pretty strong cards that are also pretty flexible, or in one archetype and very popular. Right, that'd be the other one. In B tier, we have more niche cards, so still good cards, but they usually fit into just a small number of archetypes, or they're just not as strong as their counterparts. In C tier, we have general cards that aren't really necessary, aren't really needed in the metagame right now, but have potential. And in D tier, just cards that don't really have that much potential, have some issues, could use buffs or changes, whatever. And then we do go over these cards are not released yet, but these are more guesswork, so you'd have to watch the video for that. How you doing, everybody? So today we are going over our Series 5 tier list guide for January, February. Just kind of similar to yesterday's video, we're just covering the around 25 cards, plus we have 3 cards from this month that aren't released yet, but we're going to talk about as well. So should kind of cover the bases for people that are looking to spend their tokens in a healthy way. Let's get started. Alright, so we can get straight into it. This is kind of very similar to the previous video where we're just going through some of the Series 5 cards and just like how good I think they are, whether they're worth buying, anything up high. Generally, it's more, at the end of the day, it's like, will this card make you have fun in the game? If the answer is yes, then, regardless of, where it ranks, you should get it, right? So that's really the most important thing. But generally, some cards are more flexible, fit in more decks or stronger base power, that kind of thing. So this can help in guiding that metric. So first card we're going to have is an old favorite, something that has moved up and down throughout the years. We're going to start off with Thanos in S, right? So Thanos right now has kind of had a pretty big resurgence in that it used to be very played, and then it got nerfed, right? The draw nerf with one of the Soul Stones, and then a lot of synergy has been released. And it's funny because a lot of the synergistic cards for Thanos aren't even out yet. So this card's going to get better next season, next month, right? So it's already in a great spot and it's looking to get better. Definitely a card you want to pick up right now. So definitely something to keep in mind. So yeah, I do have Thanos in S. Definitely a preferable pick if you want to pick that up right now. Next up, we have another one of the big bads. We have High Evolutionary. So this card is kind of what makes a lot of the Hulk decks, the She-Hulk, High Evolutionary decks good. It really opens up those kind of deck lists. Those decks have been pretty much good ever since High Evolutionary came out. So it's just another standard list that can kind of fight, kind of compete with some of the powerhouses of the other metas. So just a good card to have if you like some consistency. Just a deck that will generally be good for as long as High Evolutionary has like its abilities. So yeah, definitely a strong contender for us. Next up, we have the ever-present Jeff. So Jeff, just a fun-loving shark thing. Just very strong, very good. Always been able to play. It's some of its use or usability has like dropped down a little bit because there isn't as much Professor X lane. It used to be one of your bigger answers to Professor X and things like that. But still, it's just a card you can play on 2 and always be happy because you're going to find value with this card. It also prevents some kind of like annoying strategies of like locking down a lane or having locations move cards where you don't want them to be. You can just have this as like a safety net. So just a strong card. It's just been very good. It's always been good. So yeah, just a nice card to put in S. And the last card, I think this isn't too much of a surprise, is Blob. Now I'm suspecting Blob does get adjusted, right? So hopefully it doesn't get nerfed in a big enough way that it's unplayable, right? Secondary's definitely done that before where a card goes from like OP to like near unplayable. So you do have to be careful with that. But in its current state, right, it's definitely a powerhouse, part of the best deck in the game, in my opinion. So hard to really ignore that presence. I would definitely say if you don't have Blob yet, definitely wait until the nerfs or the changes to Blob to see if it's still like playable or in a good spot. But if it is, yeah, definitely still going to be part of a lot of decks. It has a lot of flexibility. People have just seen how good it can be. So yeah, definitely a very, very strong card. So those are the ones we have in S. Now we move on to A, which is generally, pretty good cards. There's maybe something a little bit preventing it from saying, oh, everyone should have this, right? First one we do have is Skaar. So Skaar, I think, is just a strong card that fits into a lot of decks and has a lot of good upsides. So it's just a big safety net, prevents your Shang-Chi's, prevent things from being destroyed. So just a nice safe card that I think a lot of people are going to want to have in their collection. So it's just a good card for sure. Next up we have Goliath. Now I'm kind of personally surprised how good Goliath still is, even after all the changes. Like, it still just does its job. If you're winning and you want to lock down a lane, you lock down with Goliath and it wins the game, right? So still does that pretty well. So it's still a nice card to have. There's some other synergies with ramp and just having this power line, you can negative it, things like that. But generally, you just play in the last turn to kind of solidify your lead in the lane and then win that lane for sure. So just a strong card still, and nothing too bad about it. Next up, we have a card that would have been an S if it didn't get changed, but we have Miss Marvel, right? So Miss Marvel got nerfed, took off a power, and its activations are a little bit harder to do. It's still doable, not like that hard to do, but it matters in some games, right? Where some games you're not going to have two cards in the lane. So it is harder to do that. But still a good card. Still, you see it a lot. Still does work. It's still a 4/14, which is still very, very good. So just a little bit less broken than it used to. Now it requires a little bit more effort. So, it's still a good card, but not as OP as it used to be. Next up, we have Black Knight. So Black Knight also is a card I think that has gotten better because other cards have gotten worse, in my opinion, and that it hasn't changed too much, but a lot of things have changed around it. So now it's pretty good. You have it in lock, discard, Hela, lockjaw decks. A lot of decks can play with it. But being able to summon like a 4/14 on turn 4 that can't be destroyed, or a 4/20 on turn 4 that can't be destroyed is very powerful, on top of you still having the ability to either revive that discarded card back from the grave or summon it back with Hela, things like that. It's just been a strong force in the meta, so definitely a card I recommend if you like those type of decks, right? A lot of these, well, that's more B territory, but sometimes this is just like Black Knight is so prevalent that it's hard to not mention it in A territory. But some of the stuff in B is like this type of archetype, but is more niche than maybe Black Knight would be. Next up, we have Iron Lad. So Iron Lad's just a strong card that has always been good in its way. It has synergies with other good cards, right? If your cards are good and you have an Iron Lad, like Iron Lad is generally going to take a good card and copy that, right? So it's just a good card for good stuff decks or decks with good abilities to copy. So Iron Lad can definitely be a powerhouse. It fits in multiple decks, so that's another nice thing about Iron Lad, even though maybe it's not as played as some of the others in the A tier. Next up, we have Nebula. So Nebula is just one of the best one drops, in my opinion, in the game. It kind of forces, or not forces, but it encourages your opponent to play in that lane, which you can take advantage of by like playing into weird or awkward locations, or playing to locations that lock themselves out, things like that. This can easily be a 1/5, easily be a 1/7 with very little effort, right? Like, your opponent has to be putting the effort. It used to have like some type of like Kitty issues where Kitty would like lock it down, but no one's really playing Kitty anymore. So you just kind of have this thing sitting there getting value, very easy, going to be a pretty big card at the end of the game. So yeah, just a strong card. Next up, we have Nico, another one drop. So just another strong one that opens up a lot of different deck builds, and people are being smart with Nico. They're playing it strategically, waiting for the right spell, and then taking advantage of it, whether it's the draw or the duplicate. I'm still annoyed by the bug currently where it will look like it's gonna duplicate, but then it destroys 2 cards. I've lost games to that, and it annoys me. But hopefully they fix that, and it's just a strong card that is one of the staple 1-drops. If you're looking to add like a 1-drop in your deck, this is one of the ones you look at. And then the last one's also a 1-drop, actually. X23. I think we were playing Destroy. X23 is one of the best ones to have in your deck. It just gives you that kind of ramp. It gives you another Destroy tool for your synergistic cards. It opens up combos like Null into X23 or not into Zola, things like that. So it's just a good ramp tool in Destroy. And Destroy can use ramp if you're trying to like spike a Daredevil, not Daredevil. That one card. What's that one card? That one card, when it dies, it doubles the power. You know what I'm talking about. But yeah, that type of card, things like that. So that's the other 1-drop. It's kind of like Black Knight in that its archetype is more niche. It's not a super flexible card. It can be, but people aren't like playing it in discard or anything like that. So it ends up being kind of in its own spot, but it's so common in a Destroyer archetype, which is a pretty popular archetype that it's hard not to put it in A tier. Next up, we have the B tier. So these cards are also generally good, but they're more niche, I would say, compared to some of the ones in A. There are some niche cards in A, but they're very popular niche cards, right? It's hard to have a niche card that's also very, very popular, right? It fits, like, they're not flexible. You play them in one archetype usually, and they're not like as popular as maybe some of the ones you'll see in A. So first one, we have Gladiator. I do think Gladiator is a good card. I would say this meta isn't the best for it, since it's a pretty heavy blob meta and people are running like Magnetos and stuff, and you just get hit by Magnetos. People are also running She-Hulk and Hulk and stuff, right? So it's just like there are weaknesses here to Gladiator where it just will give your opponent value, but it also is just a 3/8, which is pretty powerful stat line to have. And in those, there are some times where pulling something from your opponent's deck can be a benefit. So Gladiator does have its moments of power. It also has its moments of weakness, but generally it is a good card if you are playing decks that can take advantage of it, or you're running like a Shang-Chi as a backup or anything like that. Next up, we have Annihilus. I think Annihilus is just... It used to be better, right? But it got nerfed, and it was a pretty heavy nerf. But it doesn't mean that it's a bad card now. It still functions very well with Hood and Sentry. It just means like things like Debris don't work with it anymore, which sometimes that was like a super annoying combo to have. So it does lose some of that like frustration aspect, but you still have like good swings, right? Moving a -10 to your opponent is just a strong thing to do. So still a good card, just not as powerful as it used to be, but doesn't mean like it's a bad card by far. Next up, we have Galactus. Now, Thanos is an S, Galactus is an B. I'm sure it feels bad, but Galactus is, at the end of the day, it's an unfun card. I know some of you are like, hey, it's a card that I have a ton of fun with, but when it comes to the general ecosystem, you don't want Galactus to be like heavy presence, which we've had before, right? And it's just frustrating. People are just not that happy about it. So they've definitely taken some steps to reduce the power level of Galactus, and here we are now, right? So it's still okay. It's just not as easy to activate and has, some issues in terms of consistency. So that's kind of where the issues lie, but I do think there's always going to be Galactus stands. People are trying to make Galactus work, make him very strong. So it's only a matter of time before Galactus gets another nerf. They're looking at me pretty hard right now. All right. Next up, we have Loki. I actually think Loki was probably fine even before the change, but I think this change has really made it not as much of a problem as it used to be. Like Loki is not the archetype people are complaining about right now, right? So it's just like Loki, I think, is in a fine spot now where it can just do what it wants to do, and it's not as problematic as it was, initially when it was released, right? A lot of things have changed since then. So that's why it's in B tier here. Next up, we have Tribunal. So Tribunal, right, and the decks where Tribunal works, it's still pretty good. Hela discard also takes advantage of Tribunal. It's just more of a niche strategy that isn't something you're going to see or want to play all the time, right? So if you like Tribunal decks, definitely pick it up, but you can definitely play the game without having a Tribunal in your collection for sure. And then next up, we have Silk. I do think Silk's a good card. It's just like, maybe there's just a lot of good twos or something, right? Like always when I'm looking, I'm like, there's other twos I could play instead of Silk. Silky Smooth, definitely the best case of Silk in the archetype meta right now, but it's still it's still a good card if you like playing with that type of archetype, and it's not a bad card. It's just like there's a lot of options for twos, so you don't necessarily need to have Silk in your collection. And those are the Bs. Now Cs, I just think are missing something to really make me recommend the card, right? Like I don't think they're bad cards, but they're generally missing something. Like they could use a buff essentially, and I wouldn't hate it essentially. So first one we have Shaw. Shaw is fine if you're playing Super Surfer. Obviously, it's probably one of the better like main win conditions that you can have, but you don't need Shaw to play a Surfer deck, right? Like it's not like, oh, I need to build Surfer and I don't have Shaw, I can't build Surfer. You can build Surfer without Shaw for sure. Like it's we've been doing that for months, right? And it's definitely been fine. It's just another way of building Surfer. It's the popular way of building Surfer, but is it the only way, or is it even the best way? I'm not too sure. So it's in C because like it's good, but you're not really seeing it outside of Surfer, and even in Surfer, it's not a linchpin. You can still build Surfer without it, so it's just hard for me to be like, oh yeah, I have to recommend this. Next up, we have Werewolf. So Werewolf got nerfed. It used to be S tier, even like AS, like it's up there. It was definitely one of the best cards in the game, but they really hurt it a lot with the power switch, and there's definitely some thoughts on like how to make it better or how to synergize with it, but anytime I'm testing it myself, it definitely feels clunky to play with Werewolf these days. Maybe there's some cards coming up that could change that, right? Supergiant's coming out, Black Swan's coming out, things like that could maybe make it a little bit better, but it still has an awkwardness, and you're not always going to have those like new cards to make Werewolf feel good, and in those scenarios it's still just a bad card. So that's kind of my issue with Werewolf right now. It's just doesn't do as much as I would hope currently. You can like supplement it with like Zabu, but now you're like adding extra pieces to fit with this where it used to just work every time. So that's my issue there. Next up, we have Celine. Celine, I just think, just got hit with the junk nerf, right? Like a lot of the junk cards. Viper was really where you could move that Celine to the other place, right? You can still Annihilate it, but it's not as strong right now. It's got nerfed, so Celine just hasn't been performing that well. I do think like maybe a buff or something could make it a little bit more enticing, but currently it's just not the strongest piece to have if you're playing junk, right? Like if you're playing Annihilate junk, you just need Hood and Viper. You don't really need anything else. Everything else is like, I mean, Hood and Sentry. Yeah, you don't need anything else. So, Celine's like extra, but not necessary. That's kind of the issue there, right? You don't need to play. It's like Shaw, right? You don't need to play Celine in a junk deck. You could play without Celine, do perfectly fine. And the last one, you have Elsa. Elsa honestly doesn't have good stats, and you could make a case for it being in the last tier for sure. But I don't actually have a lot of like good notes on Elsa. She got nerfed and she's not very playable right now. I just don't think she's as bad as some of the remaining three. I guess. Maybe that's bias. But yeah, her stats aren't very good, and not a lot of people are playing her. So I wouldn't spend resources for her at all. And in that argument, you could say yeah, she should probably be here because that's fair. Whereas the other three above, you could play them, and I wouldn't look at you. Whereas Elsa, I would maybe be questioning a little bit. And then the last ones we have Hercules, Jean Grey, and Kang, right? So Hercules just came out. Obviously, there's a lot of problems with the card. I definitely think he could use a buff and he could be better. And it's just like turn 4 for move is where you want your most powerful things to happen. A lot of times with Hercules, yes, you can make some powerful things happen, but it's not consistent. And move is just not a strong archetype, so when you're adding these inconsistent cards into a weak archetype, it just doesn't really feel that good. So I just wouldn't recommend it at all. Jean Grey had so much hype, right? It was the first card in the spotlight. So a lot of people have Jean Grey and no one plays her, which is just, sad, but it's just hard to find time to use her, and a lot of the advantages aren't very clear. A lot of people can just mitigate her, and Jeff ruins Jean Grey. A lot of people play Jeff. It's just not an elegant card. No one really plays her as well. And then Kang, just I don't know what to say about Kang. Right? It's a card I don't want to be good in its current iteration, and it's not good in its current iteration. But it's not good not because the card fundamentally sucks. It's just it doesn't make your games better. It just makes your games long and frustrating, and and it means that you're not drawing. A lot of times you're not drawing a card that might help you, right? You have a Kang instead of a card that might help you, and it just means your average games with Kang is worse, right? So there is some downside to playing it that matters, as well as just your games are longer, which isn't fun. In this, you want the games to be shorter, so not the great card, not a card I'd recommend at all. Probably needs a rework in some way, but they haven't really talked about doing anything like that, so who knows. And then we do have the three cards coming that we haven't really talked about. I would just guess where they'd be. But for these ones, I'd probably put Grandmaster, maybe an A, and then Beta B, Supergiant C. Grandmaster I think is going to be good, just a strong card. Beta Ray Bill, I just think is alright, right? You could make it a 420, so that's pretty solid if with Odin and Wong or stuff like that. But you'd probably rather have Thor a lot of the time. It's cheaper. And then Supergiant, I think the nerf really hurt it. Going from it lost two things, right? It's going from a 1 cost to a 4 cost was a lot. It also doesn't lock the turn you play it down, right? Before it would include its turn, now it doesn't. So you're just locking down turn 5 and hoping you're alive turn 6. Not super great. Maybe you do something like Supergiant with hella discard. I think that's where it shines the best, but other than that, I don't really see Supergiant being that impressive. So that's kind of a guess there, but the other ones I think were pretty confident there in their placements. So what are your thoughts? This is just kind of to help people that have some tokens left over. I don't know what to pick up. I would be fine with anything even up to B. As long as you know that you want to play with a card, right? SA, pick up whatever. B, if you have a deck that includes that card and you want to play with it, then go for it. The bottom four, a little bit more arguable. I think you have to really want to be playing with Surfer Shaw to spend 6,000 tokens on it. That's hard to argue. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Series 5 cards. Let me know, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves and have a wonderful rest of your day. Educated calling snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you tomorrow, snap. Your skills will be